All right. All right. So this was supposed to be originally Jock in Space on the Talk of the Beautiful here, Friendships of the Beautiful. But there's some complications, so I'm kind of taking over as the host and recording this talk. But just to we were in the middle of kind of having this conversation about talking about psychoanalysis and its endpoint. Some say it's an ambiguous endpoint. And then Jockin was just saying that, well, psychoanalysis endpoint seems pretty obvious in the sense that it's a negative one. It has a negative stance, right? Like, embrace your lack. I think that's what probably most in our space would probably say too. There's a kind of embracing of lack as supposed to be the endpoint for psychoanalysis. But yeah, let's pick it up. You guys can pick it up.
And actually, on that point, I mean, Luber's working theme is to say that's not good enough, in a sense that that's the beginning point, because then the question becomes what theme are you going to orient this, right? This lack or absence around, and also that's it. And I think it's also there was recently Studebaker was in a talk with Mikey Downs where that we were talking in our DM together about that, where it's about staying in the negativity, but that's I almost feel like that's the foundational tension. Because even from my training in design, it's the same point. It's like anytime we have a language of like how might we, in terms of design questions, this is all about kind of staying in a negativity stance, but with some orientation, there's some articulation that has to occur. Either it be a thematic or it be a consideration of constraints with attentions, right? So how those things interact with each other. So it's almost and generally the discussion of the beautiful is about that, right? Because every time that we have an encounter of the beautiful, it's this strike of particularity with something more. So it's like this double move occurs at the same time. So it's not just simply a stasis, it's a dispositional state of enactment. It sends you out. So we've used that kind of language to talk about it. So I think that is useful to help draw some contrast or points.
Yeah, like on that Mikey Downs talk with Studebaker, in the beginning they talk about, I think they say code switching, which basically means how your identity changes depending on what context you're in, and how the question of what endures or what underpins all the different code switching, identity switches that happen. I think, beauty would explain or address rather what is even motivating the identity in the first place. And throughout all the contexts, while the theme or the consideration of the constraints is essentially asking the question, why is it this particular identity shift for this particular context? And I think those different layers and levels can get confused. Where whenever you ask the question, why is it this particular identity with that context, that you're essentially saying the why that identity is existing in that context. But really the why can never be something that's like readily present, something that you could point to. Like the why being beauty is something that is beyond something you just point to, because if you're pointing to it, it's not the beautiful anymore. It's back into the vectors of good and true. So I just wanted to make that point of beauty being this interesting concept, the way we treat beauty being this interesting concept where it's not, it motivates what's empirically present, it motivates presence itself, but it's not actually coupled with that which is present. But yet you can eliminate how it relates to that motivation. That's like, I think, the whole beauty project in a nutshell. But yeah, Javier, you were raising your hand.
Well, Jock can actually raise his hand.
Oh, Jock and I meant, sorry.
I'm glad you brought up the Studebaker code switching point, because in my mind, when I remember him talking about that, you guys are more informed psychoanalytic accounts than me. I mean, that reads as me as a symbolic good. Like it's the symbolic relationship, right? Because we're in different symbolic orders, we have different code switching. That's how I read that. So, which are operations of the good. So, and that's the thing. So that leaves the question of your identity: is it abounding? Actually, I think from Javier's kind of commentary on his take, I've taken from his discussion about psychoanalytics, is whenever there's an imposition of the good or imposition, the question is who's good, who's desiring this, right? In terms of a super ego kind of demanding onto you what you ought to desire versus what do you desire. You know, I think that's so. I never hear code switching. I think of it that distinction is split. Like the split subject, this kind of discussion of a split subject is this tension over. So you're not in your social cohesion in a moral good, a good social order, is not singular. We're under all these different operations of vectors of the good. So thus, it seems like it's almost impossible to have an integrated whole person, because you're just, especially when you're just collapsed into these operations of social orders, that corporate wagey, right? Online space with algorithms. So you're in even the family relationship. So all, et cetera, all these spaces have a social order that you have to respond to and orient yourselves in. And it's almost, and thus that's when I heard code switching, that's what I think of. I just think of it also in race. I think in race theory, they talk about this a lot, right? That there's a certain mode of speaking and how you present yourself that's acceptable and legitimate in some spaces versus others. And it's true, like I teach, so it's totally true. How I speak to my students or in academic spaces is not 100% like I speak casually to my best friends, right? Or at the bar. So they're just inherently different demeanors about that. So I'm just thinking about that aspect. That helps clarify that these are operations of goodness, and that's what psychoanalysis is meant to help draw you out. Because when you take that as just transparently the case, you get captured by it because you think there's no other counterfactuality, right? There's no, why does it have to be this, not another way? So that's the things I'm thinking about when I hear that from you, Luber.
Yeah.
Like Javier, you can let me know if I'm wrong with my understanding what you told me when you talked about this.
Well, I mean, I think one of the things that stood out to me that I disagreed with in the talk was they said that capitalism was not the good. And to me, capital is like the ultimate space of good. Like it's competing goods. It's all the goods in one space. There's nothing antithetical about capitalism to the good. The only thing that's antithetical to it is the fact that we have competing notions of good. And capital just so happens to be the space that we've been able to make in which we can occupy competitive notions of the good. So that's why there's multiplicities of code switching. Right? That's the one part of the talk I disagreed with, because they totally disavowed that capitalism has nothing to do with the good. It's actually the failure of the good. But I don't think that's the case. I think actually capitalism is the space of the good. It's actually what made it possible to even have multiple code switching in the first place. But to also jump on what we were talking about with psychoanalysis is that, now this is my take on the beauty with psychoanalysis point, which is I've been reading The Life You Want by Adam Phillips with my girlfriend. And Phillips points out this idea that psychoanalysis is under the idea of the good the moment we try to define what it is. The moment we try to say that it does this, this is what it does, this is the prescription of psychoanalysis. Right, so everybody has a prescription of psychoanalysis, right? For Melanie Klein, it's the depressive position. For Winnicott, it's the ability to be surprised, to play. For Lacan, you know, it's, I can't even think of it right now, the moment, but it might be something similar to like this kind of lack and jouissance kind of elements, right? Depends which Lacan we want to talk about, early, middle, late. But anyways, the point that I'm getting at with psychoanalysis and the beautiful is instead of giving a description or essence to psychoanalysis, we ask something like, what is psychoanalysis? What could we use psychoanalysis for in relation to the beautiful? And I think what that requires is psychoanalysis to be redescribed as something not negative, as something completely opposite to that. And ironically, doing that, ironically, is also kind of trying to occupy the place of the beautiful at the same time, trying to give this redescription to psychoanalysis as what are the different ways that we can think of psychoanalysis and what are the different ways that we can use psychoanalysis for. If it's just strictly a lack position, and I think I'm sympathetic to Ebert's point, maybe it's just not that useful to me. Maybe it only occupies a certain category of my thought. It's just a phenomenal experience, kind of like what Alex Ebert always says. So that's something that I've been thinking about in terms of like I like Adam Phillips' redescription of it. It's you know, psychoanalysis can simply just be the experience of the unconscious. It doesn't have to be anything else. It doesn't have to be reducible to anything else. It's just the experience of the unconscious. So in our language, it might just be the experience of news. Right? That's a wonderful leap. It's just the experience of news. That's psychoanalysis. We're constantly having conversations about our experiences of news. But yeah, I'll leave it to whoever wants to.
Luber, you want to jump on this?
Yeah, I was just. Oh, hi, buddy.
Heidegger, little Heidegger.
Little Heidegger. Let
Yes.
me make a little Heidegger point. No, well, so I think my issue, like I agree with, it's almost like when you're undergoing psychoanalysis, you're in like such an expositional state in a way in terms of understanding yourself and like your life trajectory, I guess, in a way. I'm just a little skeptical on like breaking it into parts where it's like, oh, I've undergone psychoanalysis or I understand psychoanalysis. So now I understand myself and like nobody can pull the rug out underneath me because I fully understand my own subjectivity. It's like there's a little bit of like that thrust of I have knowledge on my own subjectivity, so I can't be a fool. I can't be the fool, you know, because I know the subject. I know myself, right? But
Okay.
and I'm not saying like that's what everyone's like consciously thinking, you know. But like I definitely think, all right, get out of here. I'm definitely thinking like there is no reason to stop. I think when you start investigating the subject, it is groundless because from like, you know, the Heideggerian standpoint, there really is no subject in that way. Like I think we have to think about something that I like what Studebaker said is that what Plato taps into isn't the traditional notion of a subject that modernity birthed, basically. And I feel like what's more useful about the Platonic notion of the subject, even though they wouldn't even, it's not even, they wouldn't call it a subject, is that you're kind of, I feel like you're looking at what would be deemed the subject, but there would be like, there's a ground. It's not like this bottomless pit that you could just go on forever and ever and ever. And there's no real force of necessity that throws you out of that spiral per se. It seems like how we conceptualize the subject is extremely important because from like a utilitarian standpoint, one seems to become like very useful in the other, and the other notion, more of this, you know, Kantian notion of the subject isn't as useful because it's almost like the bracketing can go on infinitely.
Mhm.
I don't know how to stop. Why would I stop? You know, like what would make me want to stop? And I feel like
What are we
Mhm.
doing? What are we doing when we say this? Like, what would when you say what would make me stop? What are we doing?
Being there, just being there instead. Because when you're just there, you're not problematizing yourself, your ability to understand. Everything is just there, and you are totally taking it in as such, whatever is happening. Like,
Mhm.
because to me, it seems like that's the goal. Um, but then there's all these different distinctions and qualifiers where it's like, well, you don't want to be there in like necessarily like the Eastern sense of like just sitting there meditating
Yeah.
24/7. That's, you know, so it's interesting to find the healthy, what's healthy in regards to just being there, and then also what's healthy in terms of what it takes to actually get to the place of just being able to be there.
I know
um
Declan wants to say something, but
yeah.
just to jump on what you're saying, Luber, I mean, the way I understand the way some people read Lacan and psychoanalysis, with you talking about the being there, I feel like they would say that is what the negative position is about. Like, it is about accepting the idea. Like, well, if you think about it, it's not that I am obsessed with my own subjectivity. It's the fact that I have frustrations and desires that keep driving me towards a bad infinity of myself. Whereas the ability to have a conversation about what's going on with my unconscious is what eventually makes me accept, like, oh yeah, there is an infinity to this. And so I can now finally just be there. Right? You could say whatever emerges from the unconscious is just free associating, and I accept it. So that's like a real being there. And I think that's what some would say is the negative position.
Yeah.
Um,
uh, like, you don't just free associate. Like, why, let's use like the why this versus that move for that. Why are you free associating now there versus you're in the car with uh your girlfriend and their kids? You know
mhm,
what I mean? Like
mhm.
like you free associate. It's not accidental or random. It's like there's a certain context. It's like, well, I'm in like the therapy room, and that's like what it's called for because I have a certain intention by being here. Like it's extremely intentional. And like the problem is like, yes, just that they use the term tearing with the negative. When would you stop? You know, it's like even the moments, it's like, okay, I'm outside the therapy room. I'm outside of a vulnerable situation where I would be free associating. It's almost like everything outside of that is just material for me to bring into that context. It's like everything becomes put into a neat box for the sake of me understanding myself. And then and in my mind, it's like, at what point it self-effaces. At a certain point, it's not, it doesn't make sense. And there's nothing that really tells you in the psychoanalytic realm, like when that really is. You just kind of like feel it. And it's almost like, okay, now I just move on and I just keep going. And it's like not really clear. There's no call to action. That's the problem. There's no call to action. And then one more point, and which is like, I'm noticing with that people that are manic or just people that are going in the trajectory of bringing out difference, they don't code switch. That's why the more they don't code switch, the more they bring out difference, the more manic or the more mental they seem in our world. But the irony is, but the irony is, if you go the other direction of the spectrum, sameness, and you're like basically just, you know, a mimetic image of the other, essentially. That also can be seen as manic, unhealthy, like for you to code switch to such a good degree, you know, that there's something unhealthy about that too. So like finding the right ratio, so to speak, to me has nothing, like it's like, what does that have to do with psychoanalysis? Because I think psychoanalysis either brings you toward the direct, like it either makes you realize to go in those two directions, but it doesn't necessarily like have an education on how to have the healthy ratio, because I don't think that's something that can be internally mediated. Psychoanalysis helps you internally mediate things. And I think having this healthy ratio of difference in sameness is something that needs to be externally mediated, because it's not something that the subject on their own, or if someone's even just questioning them, could help. Like you need a teacher, you need somebody like almost to tell you, not like a brochure style, but like you need somebody to actually be able to communicate a suggestion like that. And I think yeah, I mean, sure, in therapy like that can happen, but it's not like the same as like a life coach in the sense of like they'll just tell you, you know. But yeah, I'll I digress. I'll stop.
Actually, I didn't think I've watched close enough into the Studebaker talk to see when they were talking about capital as not the good. Because actually, I agree with you, Javier. I think that is par excellence of fungibility, abstract good. I think that I agree with that assessment. That's all the problems with it. Any problems that come up in capital is because of that issue. It's a multiplicity of the good that now compete with each other, and it causes a generally abstractional state. Mostly, by the way, again, I don't want to. I should watch. I need to go watch further the Studebaker talk to confirm that. My suspicion is because the good is the one. Like that's why. See, that's why it's in contention. Because if the good is the one, but capital is the many, it doesn't work. It doesn't apply. That's why they would make that argument. And that issue of what is one, and actually that concept itself has huge problems, because I think a lot of people also assume the one is the all. They assume that, but there's also a tradition. This is right from Aristotle. It's right from there from the very beginning, and I think Plato has it too. The one is the negative difference. So it's right there in the problem from the very beginning. William of Ockham has a very famous line. His definition of the one is the privation of being. I remember seeing that, and I was like, what the? I was like, whoa, years ago. It really blew me away, because everyone's assumption is it's the all. It's a statement of totality as the one. But it's also equally fair to say the one is the negation. It's this privation of being.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's actually fundamentally at the core of the attention is on that aspect. Personally, for me, the part I'm very sympathetic with, and that actually is a charge of I think what I hear from Luber, is the nihilistic drive to just keep going with that drive, I guess, just the drive out to get to strike down any positive orientation or any direction. I think it is very useful in the sense of dissuading us from being captured by symbolic orders. Because so many people we see talk about the beautiful online discourse, it's just goodness, bro. Like it's just your good, and you're using. Actually, this is actually I think where Kant's move of beauty is actually very powerful. It is because that's not what we're about. That's not what I'm addressing here. Because what Kant says is that the beauty, when you see something's beautiful, you're imposing an imposition on someone else that you should agree with me, right? So it's from my subjectivity. I'm saying this is good, and you need to agree with that. And that's what this is about. That's not what beauty from the tradition I'm drawing from is talking about. And people who do use beauty in public discourse today, they're actively doing the Kantian move. I really believe that. They're really it's just their good being presented under a argument that is supposed to be persuasively by its own justification, by its own presentation, it's justifiable. Thus, you should agree to me because I'm making this claim that this is beautiful. Under my moral order. Generally, Catholics are notorious for doing this move. The individuals who generally push the hardest on the beauty claim have come from generally a religious point of view to say their religion is the beautiful. Like that's the rhetorical move that's happening here. So I'm very sympathetic. I think that's why a lot of people would have a lot of antagonism or suspicion of this discussion of the beautiful if you think that's what this is about. And constantly my move, and that's why I'm sympathetic to psychoanalysis, is to disavow that symbolic good. Is to keep saying, but why this good? Like, why this? And ultimately, because the tension generally, I think a big note is the immortality of desire. Like, that's always the catch. Like, and I think actually it's very important is that, and when it kind of very core is, and there's other traditions who point this out too, you think your desire is yours? I think that there is a tradition that says, yes, it is. Your desire is yours. In fact, actually, the only thing we have safety, we can have confidence is your desire. Maybe. But there's also other accounts saying, no, that's not the case. Biological drives, social orders, so more like societal expectations. Just both from above and below. There can be this, where's desire? What is your desire? Is this something else? Is it an imposition put on you from a below or above? So I think that's, in terms of what psychoanalysis meant to draw out, is that observation. That's actually, I think, very positive. I think that is very useful, because that's generally the problem, is we get captured by the good in a kind of transparency. We think it's so self-obviously the case, and we just run with the reasoning based on that, and orient their lives around that point. Not because actually, because the point is that you wouldn't do the move what Luber's pointing out. I think Luber's big move in thematic storytelling is why this now versus other things, counterfactuality, which, you know, that link I sent you to of Judah's work, that's really important, because that shows that mode of counterfactuality is the highest rigorous level of causation. Because that I got, like, I guess maybe put a link after about it. But the first level is observation. right? So empiricism, observe. But the next level, kind of a higher level of that, is to do interventions. So you do controlled interventions. So you isolate and you do interventions and you look for the linkage of the intervention to the effect, right? But the highest level is not just to do that, but then to ask counterfactually, why this effect? What if it was other things? That's storytelling. That's absolutely, like, I think that's Luber's mode exactly. I find it very interesting because that would normally be considered non-rigorous, non-objective, but it's actually the most objective standard now we use. I find that's what I find really interesting. I think the interrogation of desire is 100% the move. I think that is the drive and help draw the point. So basically moving from a desire to drive, and that's ultimately what if I had to argue what would be psychoanalysis contribution to the beautiful, is to help get that move. It's to get to that point of drawing out drive, getting from desire to drive, and treating lack, switching from a negative state of privation to the potential actuality, the present absence of a positive lack. That's basically the other side of the occasion. That how might we encounter now in this state of possibility? How might we encounter a new reality?
Yeah.
I do have responses to you, Luber. Real quick. So I like what you said too, Jochen, about, you know, that is the position, getting from desire to drive. That is the position. Supanchik does talk about that. Okay, but with Luber, okay, so I think there's some clarifications on that account that you gave about psychoanalysis, because you kind of confined free association with, it's just material for me to talk with my therapist, like the world just becomes material for me. Actually, some would argue the point of psychoanalysis might be that actually it's when you can free associate on your own without the therapist. So that means now you can free associate with everything that you're encountering around you. I just look at this as simply the Heideggerian clearing. It's teaching you how to be in a state in which you can be receptive to clearing. That's free association. But you have to have a confined space in which you can gain the ability to practice this clearing with a therapist.
I get real quick, because I want you to address this. It's like, I guess I view free association where it's like almost like it's very likely for you to say appalling things. like for you to say vulgar things, you know, whatever. But like what's coming to your mind, like I almost associate in a certain sense like what Dimitri's doing as free association. You know, like that's why I'm like, you can't just do that wherever, otherwise you're going to be alienated. You're gonna bring out difference in a destructive way, because it's almost like free association almost suggests you're saying something that, oh wow, there's some deep truth embedded in there, but at the same time it's almost like silly nonsense on the surface. Well, and like you pick it apart kind of thing.
I think the constraint that's purposeful to this idea, and this is what I accept, is that free association is only useful if it makes you recall a memory. So it's not just this off the wild cuff, you're just saying shit just to say shit. It's
sure.
You say shit. I mean, I think the point is to give up the idea that you're saying significant things over what you call insignificant things.
I like that.
Because once you give up the idea of, because most of us, I would say there are exceptions, right? Most of us are lumped up in the idea of neurotics. We're very hysterical about what does the other person think of me. Actually, we have the opposite problem. Like, We don't want to say what we're actually thinking, what we're actually feeling. If anything, we'll still filter out what we actually think and still say it in a different way. But the point is that we have to have a space in which we give up the idea between saying significant things and insignificant things, because actually it's that whole train of combinations that lead us to this clearing of a memory. The whole point is to get to a memory. And so that's where I find useful. I'm already forgetting where I was. Oh, but I do agree with you. But I do agree with you. The only thing is I'm a little bit uncomfortable with your phrasing about, you're not having somebody to tell you what to do to take an action. The way I interpret, because like to me, that still plays into the kind of authority orientation that psychoanalysis is trying to get rid of. But I will say this, if we accept an ontology of friendship, the way that we can look at the symbolic order is that we no longer have to look at the symbolic order as some domineering thing that is constantly reigning over us and our desires. Instead, we can take responsibility for it and come up with better symbolic worlds. And now we can look at symbolic worlds as tools for the kind of life that we want to live, which is now we can really say that the symbolic is the good, and it's a tool that we can use rather than being subjected to it.
Yeah.
That's where I do agree with you. Like, I do agree with that. We shouldn't be in this position where we should be so weird. Like, Mikey Downs, he said something beautiful. He said, I hate that people freak out about the master signifier. It's like, oh, it's the master. Like, oh, it's so bad. But at the same time, it's the only thing that makes a world intelligible and coherent because of that bad infinity. It's the only thing that stops the infinite regress of something and gives us actual meaning to hang together. So I guess what I'm saying is, rather than being subjected to master signifiers, we could also use master signifiers as tools for, again, the lives that we want to live. But an ontology of friendship would have this conversation of like, but why that master signifier over this one? But the ontology of friendship is that meta conversation of why that signifier over this one. It is the challenge of difference of why you chose that master signifier over other signifiers. And it does leave room for possibility because of that friendship to possibly be swayed, to possibly be moved into different directions.
Yeah. By the way, your friendships have inherently a contingency attached to it, right? Like, in the sense that the fact that we became friends, like you become friends with certain individuals, does have a nature of non-intentionality. Like, it does, in terms of like how an encounter had happened, and there were intentions mixed with it afterwards to sustain it and continue it and to remember, right? But also memory is actually, I think that memory point's huge, because obviously in Aristotle there are two notes of memory. There's that intentional memory of active recall that you choose, you're empowering yourself to do. But then there's the other kind of memory it's a passion on the soul. That's a very different kind of memory. You don't choose that. But yet it seems to be the closest, in my opinion, to who are you, because it's individuated. There's only the memory that you have. It's attached to your biography and your particular line of history, but then and answer that question: What did you remember it at this time, at this moment? It's the closest. And there's lots of movies that have an anxiety over that, especially when you put in false memories. It seems like really destabilize identity once you do that. For me, that validates that intuition. That intuition, I got a car honking. That intuition that is this guy backing up? What's going on? Okay, what's happening here? Oh, sorry, we got situations going on. Do you need me to back up? I see what's happening. What's happening here?
Do these people not know we're having a philosophical
Apparently
conversation?
Not. Hold on a second, gang.
Like,
oh, he's setting up a shop to eat.
Yeah, we got a whole cooking situation happening. Fascinating. Hopefully, I'm not going anywhere, so hopefully we should be okay. I don't know if you need me to move. Anyways, what was I saying? I'm in a parking spot. I'm in illegal. Anyways, I got wildly distracted. Apologies, everybody. That anxiety about memory being altered, messing with your identity, shows us that there's a deep relationship, and it's somehow different, or it seems to be a different category than thought and desire, which is funny because most people think memory is thought, but it's not necessarily true. It certainly seems closer to that when it's recall, but that's also the thing. It's like almost from a Western tradition. It's like the Eastern tradition. Eastern tradition. If the subject is the object, it's the entity that's observing, right? So awareness. So I'm chewing on that a little bit, talking about this too. But I think the big note. I appreciate also this discussion of the ontology of friendship. It is very much that remembering of the friend that actually decides a lot of the ethical questions or the orientation of the self. It's actually beyond the self. So actually, I think that's what Luber was talking about before too.
Yeah, I kind of want to jump on that because like here, I want to talk about like authority for a second because I have that example you told me, Jock, in I don't know months ago, where it's like basically it was like a discussion with a friend, and then you basically like say the thematic command in a way, and like it's like basically, in other words, for people that like don't really know what that means, it's like when you're talking with a close friend about something, let's say traumatic, they say something to you that you take to heart, and you're like, fuck, oh my God, they're right, I should do this, right? That to me is authority. Like that is not something that should be shied away from, but that's not like the authority in the sense of like the tyrant. Like it's not, it's a different notion of authority. And I think under the friendship ontology, like your friend is an authority figure for you in a lot of ways, because they have the ability to say an insight that makes you reevaluate and do a different behavior, habit, action, etc. Another thing too is they have the ability to trigger a memory, and that memory in itself can can be a force function for you to do something. That's an authority. Is memory in itself an authority? Like I would say it's closer to an authority than not.
I would say memory is what yeah, that's a good point. I would say memory is definitely, I would have no problems with saying memory is the authority, because that would be the conjunctive point of meeting. Because basically, if you don't stir up a memory, then actually you're wrong. Your interpretation is wrong. You have no authority then. So actually you're just a vessel to evoke a memory as a friend. If you're not doing that, then you could almost say this is the criteria for saying you're not really being a useful friend.
Here's this is my problem though with psychoanalysis is the idea is in talking, in conversation, you yourself are going to trigger your own memory.
Well, like, yeah, it has to be confirmed. This is why, to me, this is why it's an ontology of friendship, because it's only when a friend says something like, so why did you do that? Why did you do this in particular? Why did you do it that way? Right? If there's safety in that kind of speech, then the friend being questioned can ask and start saying, what he thinks. And then as you press with more inquiry, then the friend under investigation can be triggered a memory, right? And so what I'm saying is that kind of, like, Freud actually has a wonderful essay on this, that when it comes to interpretation, the only interpretation that is worth probably being right is if it triggers a memory. If it doesn't trigger a memory, then in fact, you're imposing an interpretation, and then now you're subjecting the individual to accept that interpretation rather than, it's almost like the confirmation principle of, is my interpretation even in the ballpark of possibly being right?
So I just want to say, like typically your analysts, let's say you're talking about your brother or sister or a family member, right? Let's say like you're talking about experiences with them, whatever. Your analysis typically probably has no experience with them, right? Your friend, like, typically does have experiences with those people. So like that's like a huge difference because they will not interpret from this like omniscient point of view. They're like hearing what they're saying, and it's like and what's being referenced in their mind is their own experiences with their brother, sister, with their friend's brother, sister, whoever. So it's like whenever they say their point, it's not coming from like a place of like analysis. It's almost coming from a place of like shared experience of the person.
There are two things I want to say on. One is, so what Luber is saying is very platonic. So I believe it's me. I think it's me thinking. I think it's Euthyphro, where Plato, basically Socrates there's a premise presented and accounts, definitions and counts presented by the counterparty. Socrates then, or actually no, I think it was me. I think it was Meno. It's either Euthyphro or Meno. Basically, where the contradiction of the account got revealed, right? Mm-hmm. And then the counterpart, well, if you say so, Socrates, and then Socrates very aggressively goes, no, it's not what I say, it's what you said, and I'm simply reflecting back I'm helping show you that doesn't work. So it's actually, I'm not saying anything. That's what's actually really interesting about that example with Socrates as presented by Plato, is that when this exchanges occurs of Elancus, this is happening. It's not Socrates speaking, it's Socrates reflecting back the contradiction in the account, or the error in the account. So that's just the first thing that came to my mind. And I connected what was said though about this ontology of the friend. So for example, when the friend, and Luber used my story, when that friend turned around to me, you know what he said? Actually, I'll give people context, help people give context. He turns to me and says, yeah, okay, but what do you want? He point blank asked that question right to my face. And then what this is, I realized I didn't have an answer. I did not know what I wanted. So it was actually the masterclass of psychoanalysis right there. And then I realized that in great horror, wait a minute, I've been operating this whole time without even knowing. I was in absolute ignorance. I didn't know it until someone asked the question. So actually, that's a really interesting counterplay point, as opposed to what Socrates was doing, which he's showing the error of the account. What my friend did was reveal I didn't have an account. It was an absolute absence hidden behind everything. And that leads, and then when you realize that, oh my God, what does that mean? And that's the thing. So actually, in terms of that symbolic order, you're destabilized because you thought you knew what you were doing and where you're oriented around, but you're realizing actually at the core, you had all these other intentions, all these other things were the consideration, not what you want. That's very shocking. And that causes you have to read now, you're put into a whole new inquiry of understanding in that case. But the last thing, actually, when I made that comment about what if memory isn't thought, and what if memory isn't desire, then what would it be? I actually realized there is a third possibility. What colloquially we call the conscience. Or the unconscious, right? Basically, it's another angle we can consider this. Meaning the idea that synderesis is a classical point, which is that kind of primordial access to the first principle that is prior to intention or thought. But yet, when we do something right or wrong, or specifically usually when we do something wrong, we get a reminder. We get some kind of recalling or calling that this is wrong. So that would be like a way to talk about it. I'm just thinking about that too.
Mhm.
I just want to say real quick, like, I have like a thing against being detached from an experience and yet being involved in helping the individual with their life or experience. You know, it's like if I don't know like your families well at all, you know? Like I only know them through what you said. And it's like I can't really like give advice like to the fullest extent because of that. You know? Like I feel like there's like what happened with therapy is like I can now comment or just help in a situation from afar. And there's really not anything at stake for me. Like, let's say I'm the therapist and I'm like helping. It's like I don't have anything to lose in the situation. Maybe like, oh, the client and like money. But again, there's like that gap of like, my skin's not in the game, really. You know, like it is in the capitalistic sense, but not in the friendship sense. Oh, let's go. um so yeah, that was that's all. Like my point is just like it's almost like cheap in a way where it's like the whole psychoanalytic field is like there can't be friendship because that would be inappropriate. That would be against the dynamic of the analyst analyzand. But then if you were to bring that dynamic into a romantic or into a friendship dynamic, that would be inappropriate because it's like you're detaching yourself from the intimacy of being a friend or a lover.
Yeah, the idea of transference, which I remember, Javi, you're talking about that a while ago. That problem, the question or issue of transference is also the opportunity of the educator or the mentor that under certain conditions, it's actually the most appropriate transformational healing is possible there.
The issue that I have, Luber, and I agree with you, Jochen, is countertransference. And you're speaking from the position, I feel like, from the position of somebody that is already confident in their desire without being subjected and rolled over by people's others' desires. I would challenge the idea that actually, if you're not in a position to confidently articulate what you think you might want and what you think you might desire, you just get rolled over by people. And that's the whole danger of having a friend that is very caring and sincere. But then why does violence emerge? Why does resentment emerge? It's like the reason why resentment and things emerge is because the person has been too passive about what they think they want and what they desire because they've already been told it's bad, versus having the ability to have the confidence at the very initial point to articulate that desire, even if it's wrong. Even if it's wrong. It's the fact that we lack the capacity to have confident speech in what we think we want. I feel like a friend can only be, I feel like a friend actually can be very detrimental to one's progress if we're not, if the person is not able to actually have the freedom of speech, like the freedom of articulating their desire without being shut down immediately. If they're not able to have that, they're just going to get rolled. And that's the whole thing with neurotics. That's how psychoanalysis describes neurotics, is that most of the time we're just getting rolled. We're just getting completely rolled by the other's desire. We're too occupied by the other's desire. So for me, it's a transition point. I do think the friendship point matters. It's just the thing is, if you're not in a position to actually hold your own position, then it's just domination.
Yeah.
It's just pure domination from a friend. It's just pure domination. You can't even have difference because you're just dominating them. You're just really rolling them.
With that point, I could totally see why. So, like, sitting with the negative from the psychoanalytic perspective would simply be being able to ask the questions, why this desire, why now, basically, because when you're actually confronting, the counterfactuality of your desire, it's tough. It's something probably people avoid. It's like they do some quirky, weird desire, and they're not even asking why they're doing it. Really, they're just doing it. And I think when someone has the ability to talk about their desire in that way that you're saying, and they basically become the authority in that space because they're able to communicate their desire so well, is because they know they've already gone through the counterfactuality of it. They could tell you why now, why this, basically. And like the people that get steamrolled essentially can't really address those questions.
Yeah.
So I totally see that. But again, it's like, okay, once you ask the question, why this desire, why now, basically, and you actually like tarry with the negative, if we call that the negative, it's then, and like we said on the top of the call, like it's like, okay, now what do you do with that? Like, how do you go about that? There's so many different departments, if you will, of inquiry here. It's like, how do you go about that without steamrolling? How and then how do you go about that in terms of like actually executing, like building out the desire now that you have an understanding of it, let's say. And like, how do you do that in such a way where it doesn't self-efface, where you go back to basically the expositional, psychoanalytic state of sitting with that negative? Because I think a lot of psychoanalytic people would say you don't actually ever get to that place of really knowing your desire.
Right.
And to your point, Javier, it's like, okay, well, explain to people like me, like I'm not to like talk myself, like when I'm in a room and I'm literally with other creatives and I'm so uber confident in why it should be this content, why it should go like this. And it's like almost authoritative because it's only because I ask why this content and why now. And like, I think there has to be some recognition of the person before asking those type of questions, and then the type of subject that has already asked those questions. And there should be a distinction made, because I don't think the latter is really tarrying with the negative anymore. Something else is happening. It's a different kind of tarrying.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I would say like, I like the use of the developmental schema. So I would say like, when do we ever get a chance to actually develop into our desires? We never really get to, because when you think about it, as a child, you're just doing what your parents want to, and you're trying to rebel against that, but you're still being forced to do what your parents want to. You're always being told what to think, how to behave, how to act. And then when you're an adult, you're still being told how to behave and how to act and how to desire and so on. So there's never a real chance that we have to really develop into like our own growth into communicating our desires, like what we think we want. And I think the point is getting the ability to grow into what we think we want does give us that confidence, But also, I think the part where I do like, and I do agree from your position, is that once we get to that point, the real negativity is now negotiating those competing desires.
Yep.
But that's the whole, that's to me, like, that is the friendship component. And you can almost say like the friendship component is that negative part where we have to negotiate each other's desires, because now from the Aristotelian point of view, and I'll just borrow that definition of a friend, is I now care about your desire too, but without being destroyed by it.
Mm.
That's the whole point, is I have to be able to have the constitution to withstand your desire without being destroyed by it, without being subjected to it, without succumbing to it. But now to the position of like, we can equally negotiate this desire between each other.
Can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
So like you're making me think that subjectivity is when you're tearing with the negative and you are in the process of asking those questions, basically. Why this desire, why now, etc.
Okay.
But it almost seems like when you talk about the quote unquote subject after that part, that process, it's almost like it's not a subject anymore. It's like, it's almost like an object. It's almost like you're an object, because like when you say negotiating, I agree with what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying, but it's like when you're negotiating, there's a certain level of like improvisation probably in that negotiation, because you have the subjectivity subsumed in your being at that point. And it becomes almost static in a way. And that's why I'm saying it's like an object. You're like an object at that point, because from the subject's perspective, looking at the person who's now an object, if you grant me that, they seem like an authority figure. There is this like pedestal of like, from the subject's point of view, they probably objectify them.
Yeah.
They probably say, "Oh, you're just full of yourself. Oh, you're just that." Like all those self-absorbed concepts you could throw onto that person, and that's why they're an object in that respect. So I just wanted to ask you, basically, would you see the subject after the tearing with the negative as an object at that point? So in that sense, is the goal of psychoanalysis is to become an object?
That'd be interesting. I mean, yeah. I mean, Supanchik does write in the Ethics of the Real that before, it's actually, for her, it's the reverse, right? Like when you do something like ethical of the real, you actually become an object. You are an object when you do an ethical of the real. It's only afterwards that once this fades away, that you become a subject, which I think is interesting.
Javier, can you give an example of that?
She doesn't really give too many examples. I mean, she gives like literary examples, but I don't think in this particular, when she gives this, that she gives like an object example. The best I can think of is that it's almost like the exemplar becomes an object once they get in that orientation of the real.
Oh, so an icon. It's like that kind of point.
Yeah. Because once you become an object, like basically you become subjected to, like, it looks evil from this point of view, it looks whatever from this point of view. It totally breaks the symbolic order. So you become like an object in that sense. At least that's how I understood it. But I don't know if I would say object, but I would say now we've really reached what it means to be intersubjective without being domineering.
Yeah. To me, it's very object vibes, because I can explain myself. It's like I can explain my desire and why now, because I could tie it to some like thematic string, so to speak. And like, because I could directly tie it to like that like theme, to a theme, it's like it calcifies at that point.
I would say, if you say partial object, I would agree with you. Because I think the whole point is, the whole point of our frustration and our desires is that we've already bought into being reducible to our egos.
Mm-hmm.
To be a subject of the unconscious is to understand that you are a partial object. So in some sense, to get to the point where you're free associating and then negotiating your desires with other people that you care about is to already understand that you are a partial object. You're not reducible to whatever the symbolic order gives you. And then so once you understand that, now you can negotiate. Now you can say, I prefer this tool over this tool. And then that's the competing friendship of discussing which tools that we think are better to live our lives with. And so now it's no longer it's more moral shift from obligations to morality as a space of conversations, of negotiating desires and wants. Because now I feel confident enough that I'm not reducible to an identity. I'm a subject of the unconscious. I'm not reducible to anything that you prescribe to me.
At the same time, actually, on the point of friendship, I mean, we talked this before, many examples where the ended because of a fidelity to a friend.
I think you cut off part of it. You said fidelity to a friend?
Yeah.
What was the other part?
Yeah.
The morality under a social order. So the whole idea that the social order of the symbolic gives us a moral orientation.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
But the point is, the ontology of the friend is the one case where that can potentially be subverted or inverted or reoriented.
Yes. Yes. I actually think go ahead, Jochen. I'm sorry.
For example, your soldiers in a war. So under a symbolic order, you got you got Germany and you got England, World War One. The Christmas armistice, for example, where it was Christmas Day. Technically, the Germans and the English were at war with each other. They should be antagonistic to each other. They should be at war. But because part of a social, another moral, or technically it's an orientation of friendship, right? We can argue it that way. That's a little messy because that was technically under another social order of Christianity and Christmas. But there's other examples where individual soldiers befriended one another, even though they were from different social symbolic, and they were able to, in that friendship, abstain from that other orientation first, because the friendship took a higher priority. I think it's kind of making note. Basically, the whole point of this discussion of ontology of friendship for me is actually the ordering of priority of desire and priority of choice.
Yeah,
because it is very different when an orientation of desire is abstractly presented versus a concrete particular in front of you. It's a very different discussion. That's also why a lot of times people who encounter death of a loved one have a complete reordering of their priorities. I thought X was important. Now, in an encounter of death, I realized that it's not important. This other thing's more important.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think death and friendship have some very strong similarities. Because you could almost say, if we define death as the ceasing of where myself begins, you could almost say the friend is that also. The ceasing of where myself begins. And so really difference could be seen as we would define death as other. And, oh, actually, this reminded me. I was thinking about, what if we return to the imaginary? Because I think going to friendship is the return to the imaginary, because it has this proximity to the real.
Mm-hmm.
I remember having this conversation with you, Luber,
Yeah.
and it makes me think that we haven't talked about this distinction in a while, about the elaboration of going from the imaginary to imagination, the space of the imagination. And I think, because if the imaginary, and this is where it connects to Jock and you pointing out that wonderful insight on the mirror stage about how the beautiful forms us in the imaginary. I think the beautiful might be the call to return to the imaginary. Because what's always emphasized is always the big other, but never how we can relate to the small other in a more useful way. It seems that the small other is always this kind of point of obstacle. Like, at the same time, it also helps us acquire different identities throughout time because of transference, right? Our parents are the first ones that we end up making our ego ideals out of. And then we encounter friends and teachers and everything else. But it's funny that the imaginary place is also the space in which you can constantly recreate yourself. But I think the object of the beauty thing is, once subjugation drops out of the picture and it becomes a space from imaginary to imagination, the beauty now transforms that space into a place of recreativity and friendship, recreating myself through friendship.
Yeah. Joking around. Fucking around.
Joke around. Yeah, I accept that.
Yeah. No, I really agree with that. Yeah. No, nothing's really coming to mind for me right now. I do have to go in like a little bit.
Yeah,
but
I gotta go too. But just wondering if Jockin has any last things.
No, yeah,
Yeah.
it covers my notes. I'm unfortunately I'm a little discombobulated at the moment. We can call it a day.
Okay. All right.
Till next time, ladies and gents.
Till next time. All right, I'll stop the recording.